Hello and welcome to Skyline's second episode tonight. I'm Driti Atri. Well, tonight, let's begin with a simple question here. What if I told you that today's biggest global stories are connected in ways most people never even noticed? One story is about Indian student, another one is about immigration. One is about artificial intelligence, another is about an Indian grandmother who wants to give up her American citizenship. And somewhere in between, there is a legal battle that could change the future of thousands of Indians living in the United States. Ladies and gentlemen, tonight we bring you 9 important stories that kind of explains what is really changing inside America and what every Indian should know. Can you imagine working really hard for years? You finish your school. You dream of becoming a doctor, you maybe want to become a nurse, or perhaps a healthcare professional. You secure admission in a university, everything seems ready, and suddenly the government tells you that borrowing money for your education is about to become much more harder. Well, that was the reality thousands of students in America were preparing for. The Trump administration introduced new restrictions that would have reduced federal student loan limit for many graduate students, partially those studying healthcare-related courses. The administration argues that universities needed to control rising education costs and that limiting borrowing, it could encourage financial discipline even further. But this week, the story took a dramatic turn. A federal judge stepped in and blocked the new rule before it could even take effect. The court ruled that the Education Department had gone far beyond what Congress had intended while implementing the law. As a result, the proposed changes have been temporarily stopped for now. But for thousands of students, this particular decision came as a huge relief. Wait, you know why this story matters for Indians? Because every single year, thousands of Indian students travel to America to pursue higher education. Many enter healthcare, nursing, in fact, medicine, research, and other professional programs. Student loans often make their dreams possible. Now imagine if borrowing becomes much more difficult, international education becomes even more expensive. Well, families already struggling with rising tuition fee, living costs, or maybe weakening rupee, they can face even greater financial pressure. Well, the case also reminds us how quickly policies can change in America. One administration introduces a rule, a court blocks it, another administration may introduce something different. Now, for thousands of students who are planning their future, uncertainty has become almost as common as opportunity. And yes, while one court ruling has brought some kind of relief to many students, another Indian has admitted to exploiting the American immigration system, creating headlines for all the wrong reasons. Because one fraud case, it can damage the reputation of thousands of honest immigrants, right? Well, while thousands of Indians, they are just trying to enter America legally, one shocking case shows how a few people, they allegedly tried to cheat the whole American system. Well, for millions of Indians, getting a US visa is like a dream. People spend years preparing. They study, they work hard, they wait very patiently. They follow every single rule, but sometimes a few individuals choose a completely different path. And when that happens, the consequences affect far more than just one person. Well, this particular week, 40-year-old Mitul Patel, he has pleaded guilty in the US federal court in Boston to conspiracy related to visa fraud. Well, according to the US Department of Justice, he was among several individuals accused of taking part in a shocking scheme involving staged armed robberies. Can you think how unbelievable that sounds? Investigators alleged that fake robberies were very carefully planned inside convenience stores and restaurants. In the meantime, individuals, they would pretend to be victims of violent crimes. Police would be called, reports would be filed, surveillance cameras would record the whole incident. But yes, according to prosecutors, the entire operation had one goal: to qualify for a U visa. Wait, let me explain. The U visa is meant to protect genuine victims of serious crimes who assist law enforcement during investigation. This was created to help the vulnerable people who suffered real physical or emotional harm. Officials allege that this humanitarian program, it was deliberately misused here. Well, according to investigators, store owner, fake robbers, and fake victims allegedly worked together to stage these crimes. Money reportedly changed the hands. False police reports were created, and immigration benefits were allegedly the ultimate objective here. In the meantime, Mitul Patel, he has now pleaded guilty, while others accused individuals they continue facing legal proceedings. Now, under the US law, everyone else remains presumed innocent until and unless they are proven guilty in the court. In the meantime, the story has generated widespread discussion inside the Indian community tonight. Because every time an immigration fraud makes headlines, honest immigrants become worried. They fear increased scrutiny, longer visa processing, more background check, and greater suspicion towards legitimate applicants. Millions of Indians, they build maybe successful lives in America through hard work, through honesty. Now, stories like these involve only a handful of individuals, but unfortunately, they often receive a lot of public attention. And yes, while one Indian is facing deportation after admitting guilt, another challenge is pushing thousands of Indians to rethink whether America is still the best destination for higher education or not. Because let's be honest, the number tells a very different story that is impossible to ignore. Well, for decades, studying in America, it was every Indian family's biggest dream. Today, that dream, it is beginning to change. Now, for years, one sentence was almost universal across Indian households. My child is going to America. That was considered the biggest dream, the biggest achievement, and often the biggest financial investment a family could ever make. But some things are changing now, and the numbers clearly show it. Well, according to the recent data, the number of Indian students studying in the US, they have started falling. In fact, student visa approvals have declined sharply. And at the very same time, countries like Germany, France, Ireland, they are becoming increasingly popular among Indian students. You know why? Well, there isn't just one reason though, there are many. Well, the cost of studying in America continues to rise. The Indian rupee had weakened against the US dollar, making the tuition fee and living expenses much more expensive. Visa rules have become stricter, students face greater screening during the application process. Many families are also worried about job opportunities after the graduation as the AI that is changing the employment market. And in the meantime, Europe is offering something different. Lower tuition fee, affordable education, better post-study work opportunity, and in several other countries, public universities, they charge very little as compared to the American institution. Well, take an example, Germany. Well, Germany has become one of the biggest beneficiaries of this particular shift. France is actively inviting more Indian students. Ireland has also witnessed rapid growth in Indian enrollment. Education consultants, they say that many students who once automatically chose America, they are now comparing multiple destinations before making a final decision. This does not mean that the American dream is disappearing. It's far from it. But the US still has some of the world's best universities. Its research ecosystem remains unmatchable. Its technology sector that continues attracting global talent. But today's Indian students, they are becoming more practical. They are asking difficult questions. How much will the degree cost? Will I get a job? Can I repay my education loan? Will immigration policies change before I graduate or not? Well, these are the questions that are definitely now influencing decisions just as much as university ranking. And that makes a major shift. Because for the very first time in many years, America is no longer the automatic first choice for many Indian students dreaming of study abroad. But while thousands of young Indians, they are choosing not to travel to America, another Indian working overseas never got the chance to return home alive. Every single day, thousands of Indians leave their home to work on ships across the world. They spend months away from their families. They cross dangerous oceans. They transport oil, food, medicine, goods that keep the global economy running. Most people never even hear their stories. But this particular week, one tragic accident or incident reminds us that there are risks that these sailors are facing. Well, an Indian crew member lost his life after a US-owned crude oil tanker came under attack near Basra in Iraq. While the vessel, Safe Sea Vishnu, it was sailing under the Marshall Islands flag when the attack took place. Suddenly, what had begun as a routine voyage, it turned into a nightmare. Well, later the Indian embassy in Iraq confirmed the heartbreaking news. One Indian sailor had died while the remaining 15 Indian crew members they were safely evacuated and shifted to the secure location. Well, the embassy officials immediately began coordinating with the Iraqi officials while extending every single possible assistance to the rescue crew and the families of the deceased soldier. Well, this tragedy is about much more than one ship. The whole West Asia remains one of the world's most sensitive regions. Even after diplomatic effort and ceasefire, commercial ships continue operating under constant security threats. Well, every attack on a merchant vessel reminds us, maybe the entire world, that the international trade can be disrupted in just a few moments. For India, this story, it is specifically emotional. Thousands of Indian sailors work on international cargo ships, oil tankers, commercial vessels. They are among the backbone of global shipping. Yet, their sacrifices rarely make headlines until and unless tragedy strikes. Behind every sailor is a family waiting for a phone call, parents waiting for their son, a wife waiting for her husband, children waiting for their father to return home after months at the sea. Unfortunately, for one Indian family, that wait has now ended in grief. The Indian government has now assured all the possible assistance to the affected family while continuing to monitor the safety of other Indian nationals working in the region. And while one Indian family mourns an unimaginable loss, another Indian origin professional in America is making headlines for an entirely different reason. Well, this time the story is about success, record-breaking success rather. Ladies and gentlemen, while one Indian was remembered for his sacrifice, another Indian origin executive has rewritten the history book of the corporate America. Well, when people talk about Indian success in America, they often mention CEOs, Google, Microsoft, Adobe, IBM. But this particular week's story comes from another corner of corporate America, finance. That's right, Tesla's Indian origin Chief Financial Officer, Vaibhav Taneja, he made global headlines after his record-breaking compensation package became one of the biggest ever awarded to the corporate finance executive in the US. In fact, last year, his total compensation it crossed about $139 million, making him the highest paid CFO in the American corporate history at that time. Well, although another executive has now broken that record, Vaibhav Taneja's achievement that remains remarkable. Can you think how extraordinary this journey is? An Indian professional working his way through one of the world's most valuable companies, eventually becoming its CFO and receiving one of the largest executive compensation packages ever seen. Much of that package comes through stock award linked to Tesla's long-term growth and his promotion to the CFO. Well, it reflects not only personal success but also the enormous value companies place on experienced financial leadership. Well, this story, it represents something much bigger. Indian professionals are no longer just contributing to the American companies. Well, they are helping lead them. Across Silicon Valley, Wall Street, in fact, healthcare, finance, AI, and scientific research, Indian origin executives, they continue occupying some of the most influential positions in corporate America. Well, for millions of young Indians dreaming about international careers, stories like this provide inspiration. They prove that talent, experience, and leadership, it can open extraordinary opportunities. But even as Indians continue reaching the highest corporate position, thousands of other Indians, they are still waiting for something much simpler. A green card. That's right. For many of them, that particular wait has now stretched into decades. Ladies and gentlemen, while some Indians, they were leading billion-dollar companies, others are still waiting for permanent residency after spending years building their lives in America. Well, can you imagine spending your entire career in America? You pay taxes, you follow every immigration rule, you build a family, you buy a home, you contribute to the economy, and yet you still don't know when will you receive permanent residency. Well, for thousands of Indians, this is not imagination, it is reality. Well, this particular week, Republican Senator Roger Marshall, he openly acknowledged what many immigration experts have been saying for years. Well, he described the green card backlog faced by Indians as deeply unfair. That's right, speaking before the Indian Americans, Mr. Marshall questioned a system where skilled professionals can wait up to 70 years simply because they were born in one particular country. Can you think about that? 70 years, longer than many people spend their entire lives working. Here the reason lies in America's country-based green card limit. Now, under the existing immigration law, no single country can receive more than 7% of employment-based and family-sponsored green cards each year. India sends about one of the world's largest numbers of highly skilled professionals to the US. But despite a lot of demand, the annual quota that remains the same. The result is the backlog affecting hundreds of thousands of families. Here many applicants currently receiving green card first applied more than a decade ago. Others entering the whole system today, they may wait several decades if the law remains unchanged. In the meantime, Senator Marshall, he praised the contribution of Indian origin to the US. Well, he pointed out that although Indian Americans make up only a small percentage of the US population, they contribute disproportionately through taxes, innovation, in entrepreneurship, maybe medicine, engineering, research, and technology. Well, he argued that legal immigrants should not be punished simply because many applicants happen to come from the very same country. His remarks has once again revived the debate over immigration reform. Should America continue using a country-wise limit, or should green card be issued based on merit and application dates instead? Well, for thousands of Indian families, the answer that could shape the rest of their lives, because immigration is not just paperwork, right? It decides where children grow, where families settle, where careers develop, and where people eventually come from. But while thousands continue waiting for the permanent residency, another immigration proposal, it could make becoming an American citizen even more expensive than ever before. Well, America has always described itself as a nation built by immigrants. But today, one new immigration proposal is kind of creating an emotional debate across the country. Well, according to reports, the Trump administration has identified more than 500 unaccompanied migrant children who could face deportation. Well, these are the children who entered the US without a parent or maybe a legal guardian, and they are now currently in government custody while waiting to be placed with relatives or sponsors. For many people, this story is much more than immigration. It's about children. It's about safety. It's about what responsibility government have towards vulnerable young people. In the meantime, Democratic Senator Ron, he has strongly criticized the proposal, calling it a serious institutional failure. Here he argued that deporting the children without any proper protection, it could place them back into dangerous situations. Now, earlier efforts to deport similar groups of children, they were blocked by a federal judge. But now a fresh effort appears to be underway. In the meantime, supporters of stricter immigration enforcement argue that immigration law, it must apply equally to everybody, regardless of age, and that governments have a duty here to secure their borders. However, critics believe that children deserve additional protection and that humanitarian concerns should come first. This particular debate once again highlights how divided America has become over immigration policy. Every new administration brings different priorities. Every court ruling changes the legal landscape, and for thousands of migrant families, uncertainty has become part of everyday life. But yes, while some people are fighting to stay in America, another elderly Indian woman has voluntarily decided to leave behind her American citizenship, and that too forever. That's right. While millions dream of becoming American citizen, one 94-year-old Indian woman has made a decision that has moved people across the country. What is the value of citizenship? Is it the passport that you carry, or is it the place your heart still calls home? Well, for 94-year-old woman, that woman is from Andhra Pradesh, India, the answer that was very clear. After spending years in the United States and becoming an American citizen, she has finally decided to give it up all. That's right, her wish is simple here. She wants to die as an Indian. Mahalakshmama, that's her name. She moved to the United States after her husband's death and later became a US citizen in the year 2000 while living with her son, who's a doctor now. She spent many years abroad, but in 2018, she returned to her native village in Andhra Pradesh. Well, since returning home, she has voluntarily applied to restore her Indian citizenship. In fact, she recently completed the official oath in Telugu language before district authorities, expressing her desire to spend the rest of her life in the country where she was born. Well, officials present during the ceremony, they described the whole moment as emotional. Well, for many Indians living abroad, this story has kind of touched a deep emotional chord. People often leave India in search of education, career, or maybe better opportunity. But for many, the emotional connection to their homeland that never truly disappears. Her story reminds us that identity is not always defined by the passport that we hold. Sometimes it is defined by memories, by language, by family, and by the place where we wish to spend our final years. Well, her application has now been forwarded to the Ministry of Home Affairs, which will take the final decision regarding the restoration of her Indian citizenship. This is a powerful reminder that even after decades abroad, home can still remain home. But yes, while one elderly woman wants to become Indian, once again, thousands of green card holders in America are now worried that becoming a US citizen, it could become far more expensive for them. Ladies and gentlemen, for many immigrants, the journey does not end with green card. The final destination is citizenship, and that destination may now cost much more than you can imagine. Well, for many immigrants, receiving a green card, it's the only first step. The final goal is a US citizenship. It brings security, voting rights, a permanent future, and the peace of knowing that your immigration journey is finally complete. But now, that final step, it could become much more expensive. Ladies and gentlemen, the US Department of Homeland Security has proposed increasing citizenship application fees by nearly 75%. That's right. And if that is approved, the standard paper application fee could rise from $760 to nearly $1,330, while online application would also become slightly more expensive. The proposal does not stop there. The government is also considering removing several waivers and reduce the cost options that could currently help the low-income applicants to complete the citizenship process. Here, officials say the changes are necessary because immigration services could recover the full cost of processing applications. Here, they argue that citizenship benefits could no longer be subsidized by fee collected from other immigration categories. But yes, critics do disagree here. Immigration experts warn that these higher costs could discourage many permanent residents from applying for citizenship, now specifically families already struggling with rising living expenses. This particular proposal, it is currently open for public comment before any final decision is made. But for millions of immigrants, including thousands of Indians, it has already created fresh uncertainty. Well, after years of waiting for visa, years of waiting for green card, many now have to pay significantly more simply to become an American citizen. Well, perhaps that is the biggest message from all of tonight's stories. Ladies and gentlemen, the American dream is not disappearing, but it is certainly changing. While students are reconsidering where to study, immigration rules continue evolving, legal pathways are becoming more expensive. Global careers are shifting, yet, despite every challenge, Indians continue making remarkable contribution around the globe. From corporate boardrooms to hospitals, universities, research laboratories, shipping lanes and technology companies. And that resilience, that remains biggest strength of the Indian community all around the globe. Well, this was Skyline. I am Driti and I'll see you in the next episode.